We have Steve Collins here from Swerve, and Steve is going to give us a rundown of 6 tips to maximize player LTV. Steve?
Thanks, Neil. Okay, I can hear that you can hear me. That's good. First off, congratulations for making it this far. You must get all awards for actually persevering with the show. So thanks for turning up. What I'm going to talk today about is 6 tips, 6 sort of observations that we've come to, having sort of observed lots of different games and apps using Swerve, sort of achieve the sort of LTVs that they're hoping to achieve. And I'm just trying to pattern match to those successes and give you an idea of what those behaviors were among those game developers and app developers. Just very briefly, you might not know about Swerve, so I'll quickly give you a bit of context. We have a platform that allows people to do native in-app notifications, push notifications, real-time A/B testing, and app analytics and segmentation. That's all I'm going to say about Swerve. So you can come up to me afterwards if you're interested in more data. So I think this is as Neil said, this is the equation that keeps us all awake at night, or I hope it does, because this is the important thing. How do we get a return on an investment for the users who are using our applications or our games? Now, this is a very simplified version of that, of course, but essentially we're looking on the ROI, and our cost base is the user acquisition spend, the cost of actually serving users, the cost of the infrastructure, of having those users sitting on our servers, all those sorts of things, and actually, having a team who are developing and monetize and managing the game. Really, the part of this where you have a lot of control is in this LTV component. Your user acquisition cost is going to be your user acquisition cost. The cost of serving your players, you can certainly optimize that. But really, the area where you can shine, the area where you can innovate, is in the different sort of techniques you use to maximize player LTV. And that's what I really want to talk about today. Now, you know that having acquired users, there's a lot of things you get involved in to sort of achieve that lifetime value. Certainly once you get users on board into your game, you need to establish very quickly that there's something cool for a player to do. You need to let them know what the great thing about your game and why they should continue to play it, why they should engage with it, and ultimately why they should pay something for continuing to engage with the game. I'm not going to go through all of these things in detail, but fundamentally it's about trying to get those users to understand value and then converting them into paying users and making them happy to be paying users inside your game, developing that loyalty. Now, the honest truth is a lot of our games, there actually are very short-term LTVs. You can achieve the sort of return you're looking for from players in a very short space of time. If you're lucky enough to have very loyal players and payers who continue to pay over long periods of time, that's great too. But this is one of the highest monetizing apps on the Swerve platform. And what we see is the first 30 days worth of revenue, we actually achieve that, or the app achieves that within the first 4 days or so. So there's a huge concentration of sort of energy or momentum in the payments that are happening inside your app, inside of that first 4 or 5 days. So it sort of highlights the short time span that you have to sort of influence your players, to really show what it is that your app can do, and to get them to become that loyal and paying customer. And that sort of differentiates games, I think, from a lot of other apps. Whereas a lot of other apps have a natural, re-engagement inclination for example, a calendar app or a taxi, app or something like that. You revisit that app continually. But with a game, you sort of have a short attention span. You have a short opportunity to convert that player and to really start to engage them. So that's what we're going to look at. How do you, really zone in on those players and talk to them as quickly as possible? So we're going to focus on increasing that lifetime value using in-app marketing. Now, in-app marketing is a huge term. It's a sort of let's call it real-time direct marketing, for one of a better description. It's the activities you engage in inside of your game that aren't necessarily about the game itself, but are about engaging with users, messaging to users, the monetization, the merchandising, the promotion systems, all that sort of activity. All comes under the general banner of marketing for this talk. So I have 6 tips. I've got 20 minutes. I've already used 3 of them, and that gives me about 2.5 minutes per tip. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through some of this stuff. Now, we provide A/B testing, so of course I'm going to say this. Test everything and test often. I think we see that the most successful apps that use Swerve are the ones that really engage deeply in testing and build testing into the very culture of how they develop their apps and their games. And you know what testing is. I'm not going to go through a huge amount of detail on how to run an A/B test or anything like that. But fundamentally, you're observing things that are happening inside of your games, As you make those observations, you start coming up with ideas, hypotheses that you need to challenge. And you can challenge those by actually running different versions of the game, changing features, changing pricing, changing promotions, and seeing exactly what happens. So take those actions and get into this sort of virtuous loop of continually refining and adapting the game as you see behavior changes inside of your population. And what you really need is a platform that allows you to do that very quickly and to take those iteration steps really, really quickly. The types of things you can test, again, you'll probably know what these are. Test your merchandising and promotion in the store, test different pricing elasticity. There's a huge amount of opportunity there for people to increase the revenue they're generating from their existing users simply by exploring propensity to pay at different price levels. You can test, obviously, UI layouts and ad formats and things like that. You can test content. You could even use this system to roll out different versions of a level and to see which one players like best, and use that to sort of decide how the actual game evolves over time. Or doing more subtle things like requesting users register, or requesting that they share their Twitter ID with, so you can actually post their Twitter stream, or request that they register with Facebook, or request that they give you the right to send push notifications to that service. So those sorts of things are things you can test, both the messaging and the timing. Really critical about when you request that permission from that user. You want to do that when they're already engaged. Now, soft launch is a great time to do all this stuff. This is the time when you've got your alpha or your beta community. Quite often you'll have established, with those guys that we're going to be testing, we're going to be trying things out, so prepared to see things change in the app. And during soft launch, you can sort of iterate towards very definable goals. And depending on the genre of your game or your application, you'll have different goals. And the classic 40-20-10 rule sort of is a great way to start out. You're looking for a 40% day 1, a 20% day 7, and a 10% day 30. That's a reasonable rule of thumb for any successful mobile app right now. Now, obviously, there's huge variances from within different styles of apps, but certainly that's a good target. And what you need to do is constantly test, refine, change the game, change the onboarding process, change the tutorial, so that you can start to see these sorts of curves emerge and you get rid of some of the hazards that exist inside of your game. Other things you want to do is test different flows, like the tutorial sequence. This is an actual tutorial flow from a game, and we can see that there's a choke point. There's a drop-off rate here where users just don't bother going any further than stage 7 in this tutorial, which is a bad thing. So you can spot those with analytics, and then you can test that with an A/B testing platform. Try different versions of that step. Now, one thing I wanted to just reinforce is the importance of having a good mathematical underpinning of your tests. Don't just run a test, run 2 different versions of a piece of content and look at the numbers, and conversion rate A was 35%, conversion rate B was 38%, and assume that's a good result. It's not. You need to understand the underlying data. You need to run statistical analysis. And here's a good example of a test that was run with 4 different variations. And you can see that over the lifetime of the test, at about the 5,000 user level, when we'd observed 5,000 users, we might have assumed that one of these variations was the winner. But in fact, later it emerges that another variation turned out to be the winner in this case, and ended up being a 95% probability winner after about 50,000 users. So you really have to know how to run these tests, and you have to know about the math underpinning the tests. And this is a view of the conversion rate that we saw for that population over time. And this is something else you see. When you start measuring conversion rates, that conversion rate is a sample until such time as you have a significant enough number of users. And that sample can vary quite considerably during the early stages of a test. We're showing here a confidence interval with 2 standard deviations around the mean for your conversion rate. And this is showing that there are indeed 2 different conversion rates for the A and B group, but it does also show at the early stages of a test, it's very hard to tell that because there's just too much noise happening. Okay, so if you're running A/B tests, run them correctly. 2, remote configurable store. So you want to be able to do things like change the store dynamically, change pricing dynamically. So make sure you can do that via a content management system. Don't force yourself to resubmit to the App Store just to change a price or change a configuration. Here's an example of a store that Swerve remotely manages. So in this case, we've got classic coin bundles, and they're mapped directly to a content management system. So the product managers can go in and change things around, change the relationship between real money and the virtual money. So you can sort of play with exchange rates. And this is a sort of test you can start running. You can start playing with exchange rates between real and virtual currencies, or even between the different virtual currencies if you have multiple currencies and an exchange between them. You can get quite sophisticated with this stuff as well. You can actually change that exchange rate over the lifetime of the game itself. And as users become more power users, you can actually tweak the inflation rate inside the game. Another thing you can do, which people think you can't do, is price elasticity test the actual price itself of an item. So yes, there are fixed price tiers inside of Apple, less so inside of Google, but you can sort of late bind your store items in the game to the actual product SKUs or the SKU IDs inside of the App Store. And as long as you're completely upfront with users about the price of something, that's a perfectly valid thing to do. Here's just some examples of purchases happening inside of an app. I'm just showing some of the implications of A/B testing. So this is one of those sorts of apps that has the different gems at different price bundles. $2 for a certain number of gems, 5 for more than 5 times, and et cetera, et cetera. And we've got about 5 different price points here. And along the bottom, you can see the value of the first purchase of the user. So some of the users way out there on the right-hand side, their first purchase was $70. And then on the Y scale is the total purchase of that set of users, the total spend from those users. And what you can see is some really nice examples of users who are repeat purchasing at the very highest price point. So these are users who initially paid 70 and then continued to pay 70. And you can see that sort of stratification of the total revenue. And up here you have your VIPs. These are your super high payers who are continuing to pay. And this is a sample just over a period, I think, of about 4 weeks. So these are your most loyal customers. You can also see the results of A/B tests. So here we're doing price elasticity testing, and originally the price was around about $30, but we've sort of originally the price was around $28, $27.99, and we've slowly slid the price up to $29.99 with no appreciable change in retention or engagement of the users, but with a decent extra lift in the ARPU of those users in that particular price bucket. Segment your users. So different users have different propensities to do things inside of your app. There's no such thing as an average user. There's no such thing as ARPU. We talk about average revenue per user, but that's a complete nonsense. There is no average revenue per user. The distribution of revenue per user is so wide that an ARPU number is largely meaningless. I'm still going to use it in this talk, but it is largely meaningless. You have to look at the distribution. So here's an example. This is revenue per paying user, so it's an even noisier and wider distributed measure. And this is the paying user amount for high-paying users, mid-paying users, and low-paying users. So these are all paying users. And you can see a couple of immediate observations. One is the high-paying users is quite a noisy curve. That's because we have very few users. And so that gives rise to high variances in your ARPU for the higher payers. So important to stratify your users, break them into different buckets, and treat them differently. And there's loads of different buckets you can use here. You can start thinking more as a classical marketer and deal with RFM sort of breakups. So this is recency, frequency, monetization. And that's classic, direct marketing 101. Anybody who does a marketing course will know about RFM sort of stratification. But obviously, as we engage with users in different platforms, with different sort of social behaviors, all those sorts of things, you can start thinking about lots of different dimensions of our user base. And within each one of these, you want to find pockets of users that are behaving coherently so that you can provide, a very specific set of custom actions to those guys. This is sort of what you want to build up. You want to build up a map of your users and sort of identify behavioral groups and then start mapping strategies against those behavioral groups. You want to move users into your high-value, loyal paying users. But also you need to map different strategies for users who maybe will never pay. So perhaps you might want to cross-promote them into another app in your network. Perhaps you want to use ad strategies. Even when you start using ads, it's really important to figure out, well, what sort of ads do these users like? Ads nearly can be sort of an entertainment medium in and of themselves inside of an app. And some users really love video ads. They just like watching trailers for things. So make them a high video watcher sort of user and feed them video ads from your high-value video ad networks. So here's an example of real-world sort of segmentation and actually targeting different price tiers at those different segments of users. So this is a live app. Within the app, we have your classic sort of price bundles for the gems or the coins. Now, if the eagle-eyed among you will start to see some of the differences. A regular intro player sees that set of price points, the lowest price point being $0.99. As soon as you spend, the first thing that this app does is it replaces out the $0.99 with a $1.99. Now, it's better value because you get more coins per buck. But what it does is it sort of immediately says, you're a payer. You've shown a propensity to pay. So let's make sure that if you pay again, which a lot of players will do, that you're paying more on average. And that increased the revenue in this particular game by, I think, around about 20%. Even just that simple, subtle little thing. And once you start establishing someone as being a high payer who wants to spend more in your application, loves playing the game, and really dislikes being prevented from loading up in coins and things like that, you start switching out the higher value price points for even higher tiers. And that works really well. Players actually they like this sort of behavior because you're removing barriers for them to consume the application more and more. And that's what you don't do, which is hit stop slides. So here's another example of stratification. So your players are playing the game. You segment based on likelihood to do something, for example, a churn propensity score. So identify players who are likely to churn out and send those guys cross-promotion to another game on your network or a game on a partner network through some of the CPI networks that you might be involved with. So this gives you an opportunity to leverage more sort of value from that player, although you know that they're not going to pay inside your game. But similarly, if you notice that some players are going to pay, so if you have a propensity to purchase scheme implemented internally using some propensity scoring, and for those guys, send them an in-app promotion and give them an opportunity to pay for something inside the store. So the fourth tip, getting through these quickly, manage your economy. Now this is a subtle thing. Your economy has sources and sinks. Players get virtual currency by purchasing currency. They also get gifted currency, particularly at the start, and they spend currency. And it's really important to sort of manage the amount of currency that exists at different stages in your game. You don't want to have currency loading up and players with no opportunity to spend that. One of the things that you want to play with initially is the currency balance you give players right at the very start. And this is a critical thing to test. So the initial currency that a player gets has a direct correlation with the time before their first purchase. How long does it take before that player becomes a paying user of your game? If you give them a game where they have to spend an awful lot of money very, very quickly and spend an awful lot of that currency balance, that free currency balance very quickly, they'll churn out because they haven't really seen enough of the game to warrant staying and becoming a payer. Similarly, if you sort of make it that the game takes a very long time to get rid of that currency balance, then they can sort of consume a whole ton of the game without ever having to pay anything, and it might be they just get bored and leave. Similarly, you can grant very high currency balances or very low currency balances, and it's about finding that balance between time and the sync rate of your currency to get the players into the right sweet spot where they're converting with the highest potential rate. Here's an example of a game just showing the level players are at before they initiated that first purchase, and you can see it's heavily skewed towards the first sort of 20 or 30 levels, but also you'll see that some players, they'll play for ages, never converting and grinding away, but eventually will convert, so don't lose hope. Similarly, the days before first buy-in, heavily skewed towards the left-hand side, the early stages. But again, players can play a game for hundreds of days before ever actually converting. So make sure you know what's causing players to convert. Look at the items that are selling inside of your store and actually treat it as a retail unit. You have to figure out the things that people like paying for and continually promote them and cross-promote them. And this is sort of the ultimate goal, is by level you can sort of monitor the sources and sinks of your currency and figure out whether certain levels are causing people to load up in currency and other levels are causing people to have no currency at all. So that's a tricky thing to do, and some of the more sophisticated app developers are actually right in the middle of all this right now. Okay, second to last, implement a promotions calendar. So a lot of this is about communicating with players, and a really good sort of process to get into is have your marketing team with a continual promotions calendar where you're doing things like cross-promoting your games on different networks, or you're cross-promoting even within your own network of games. Story Toys, for example, do a great job of this, of very subtly cross-promoting the different sort of books and 3D apps they have. And sort of build that into something that looks like this. It's a real calendar, where you know what's happening, every day. You know what's happening every second Tuesday. You know what weekends a game is going to launch. And this then is used to sort of promote and to drive all the in-app marketing efforts you're going to get involved in. And a really good example of that works well inside of apps is where you start letting your players know that at certain frequent times during the week or during the month or whatever, special events will be happening. So this is sort of creating an event mechanism inside of your communities. So for example, in Pitfall, they have a Super Wednesday, which causes a sort of a payment spike every Wednesday, simply because players come back, they know there's going to be a 50% discount, and they spend time during that stage to load up on any currency they want, and then they play for a little bit. And it gets players coming back as a sort of a re-engagement tactic. And then finally, deep linking. I don't know if you're aware of deep linking, but certainly this is starting to become very important for re-engagement campaigns, certainly in the mobile app space. Being able to link directly into your application and bring a user into some core component of the app very quickly without that user having to navigate through menus is critical. So here's an example. You send the user a push notification. That's fine. So typically you swipe at the push notification and it launches the app and you're brought into the menu screen of the app. But what you'd really like to do is have that push notification drive a user directly to, say, the store if you're promoting an in-app item. But let's imagine you're actually promoting something else, like, hey, they've shifted in the leaderboards. So you're using some viral mechanics to say, hey, you've just dropped 10 places in your leaderboard. And when the user clicks on that, they go directly to the leaderboard place with their position highlighted. And so you can really sort of establish that competitive urge for them to start playing again. Or similarly, you might say, hey, there's new achievements. We just released a new achievement block, and the user has already loaded out all the achievements. So here's 10 new achievements you can play with. And again, it brings them directly to that point. Now, to do that is fairly straightforward. Push notifications on iOS and Android have payloads that you can populate with whatever you like. And that's an easy way for you to implement this. So you can put in a sort of an arbitrary code in there to represent a deep link. It's sort of like a general URL. And that can link, then your app can respond to that. Now, it turns out this is something that the apps, the platforms themselves support through custom URLs, which a lot of people don't seem to use, which is sort of surprising. The idea here is you can publish any link you like using a custom URL, and the platform itself interprets that and will launch the app that's identified here, and will pass through to the app a custom sort of link schema. And so this is essentially a key value pair that gets passed through, or multiple key value pairs that gets passed through to the app, and it can do then whatever it wants, like launch and handle that URL schema directly to redirect or to do something to bring up an app or bring up an in-store item or to direct the user to a level or whatever. This is a really powerful way to connect your marketing with the actual sort of details of your application. And using that, you can connect native ads, web ads, email links, and cross-promotion links right into the app itself, which is cool. And I'd recommend you use that. That's 6 tips. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to come up afterwards or to visit the Swerve stand. Thank you very much.
It's a pretty good presentation when the cameras all go up to take pictures of the screen. So I like that. Any questions? Anyone? Here.
Hey, so you mentioned in one of the examples like a weekly Wednesday sale. Don't you think that could cause sorry? Don't you think that could cause some sort of sale fatigue, on one hand, or on the other, sort of training your users to not purchase unless it's a Wednesday sale?
Yeah, and you have to find a balance, and really the metrics are what's going to help you there. You can segment your audience, and for example, you can run a sale for a period of time and then turn it off, and then watch exactly what happens afterwards. And usually it's about balancing, yes, sale fatigue versus just giving people a chance to come back. Now, the sale thing works particularly well in late stage apps, where you've already, let's say the app has been out for 3 to 6 months, and really your users are very loyal already, and you're just getting them to come back and to give another opportunity to pay. Really, I suppose the most important thing is understanding and knowing your user base and actually talking directly to them and asking them, hey, does this bother you? So a great way to do that is to use voice of the customer, run surveys, talk to them and see whether this is actually having that sort of impact. And certainly it would do if you just ran it without any consideration for your users.
Hi, Steve. You were talking about deep linking and being able to send the users to specific landing pages. Can you, if we're talking about a specific offer you're giving a user, can you optimize the deep link landing pages to find out which one is perhaps the best particular price for that user or that offer or that user group?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's any amount of complexity you can go into here. Certainly, you can do things like you can A/B test the actual push notifications themselves, because you've got total control over who you push to via the push tokens. You can also completely test and optimize the different promotions and try, say, run 4 different promo deep links and see, which one is giving you the best conversion rates. Absolutely. You can start getting even more sophisticated than that and start, running tests that span both of those. So sort of longitudinal tests across entire marketing campaigns. But essentially the answer is you can test anything you like, and sometimes it's a matter of how much time you have to actually run all these great tests. Testing the link that people land on is, in my view, sort of 101 in terms of promotions, yes.
Is there any examples that you can recall that have done a really particularly good job with deep linking? Because I was trying to think through that as you were bringing it up too. Just like really good.
The thing that sort of I find surprising is that more deep linking doesn't happen today. So, which is good and bad, I suppose. It's good in the sense that, well, maybe we don't need deep linking, but I think it's a huge opportunity to further improve, or remove friction for users. The fact that you click on a link and immediately, if you have the app already installed, all you get to see is a menu screen is a lost opportunity. You know, there are apps. I'm trying to think of a good example on a Swerve basis that links directly into the App Store. I'm pretty sure that we did some of that for some of the Activision titles, but I'd have to check.
No, I mean, it was less about the app itself, but I thought the same thing. I couldn't think of anyone who was doing really great deep linking out of some of the better games that I've played.
What you're going to see is, you know, Twitter and Facebook both have announced sort of support for deep linking. Twitter in particular, you know, with some of their cross-install campaigns, they support a new schema for deep linking. You know, deep linking isn't anything particularly special. You know, we use it all the time in the web world, but in the mobile world, you know, because the apps are sort of opaque and black boxes, it can be difficult to get in there. So there are two initiatives. One is sort of deep linking and being able to sort of get apps to communicate more readily with each other at different levels. And the other is sort of powering sort of search engine optimization into the app itself and being able to sort of tag those links with different tags, and therefore you can sort of search into the app, which is what, you know, Google is sort of really pushing at the moment.
One last question I think we have time for.
Yeah, regarding A/B tests. So yeah, you mentioned that everything needs to be tested as much as possible, but how are you making sure that the test is really that you can look at the test and detach like one test from the other? Because at the end, if the user is seeing too many tests, then one result can influence the other.
That's a great question, and I think it sort of highlights the need for having, you know, a good testing platform. So one thing is really important is to understand whether one test can influence another. And if you think there's any possibility of that happening at all, you want to make sure you're fully segmenting your audience into disparate groups that are non-overlapping, and you can run independent tests in each of those with guaranteeing there are no cross factors that can sort of pollute both of those tests. So, you know, it's absolutely a requirement, particularly when you've got multiple tests in flight from different product teams, for example, in your company. You might have the marketing team running marketing tests and the product team running UI tests, and they're certainly going to interact a lot. So what you really want to do is segment your audience into two different groups there and say, marketing team, you get this percentage of the audience, product team, you get this percentage of the audience. So the ability to create mutually exclusive sets of users is absolutely critical.
I think we're out of time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, folks.